Papatuanuku, Earth Mother. Kohutea, the mist. Tane, God of the forest, God of man, God of light. It's a nice, peaceful feeling up here.
Every time you move your head a few centimetres, a few inches or something, you get an entirely different view. For any artist, I think, it must be the most extraordinary thing to realise that nature is a master.
One of the things that happens to me quite often in high places is I kind of try and relate to the landscape. And one of the little tricks I've got is trying to condense a period of geological time into a more manageable span, something like 30 minutes, which is the time we'd sit in front of a television film. Only in the last 30 seconds have the great ice tongues gone out of the Clinton and Arthur Valley. And with a second of that film to go, herds of giant moas still crossing McKinnon Pass. The first European crossing the pass, construction of the track, the whole tourist tradition of tramping the Milford track, a kind of brief blur before the final credits, which is perhaps appropriate because it shows how insignificant our human schemes are on a landscape like this compared to nature's grand designs.
The more I walk on the Milford track, the more I notice the track itself. And almost surprisingly, I've come to the conclusion that I really like the way that it flows through the landscape, especially here on the tops. Perhaps this is how lines flow through the landscape in Nepal and South America, and just something that's been created by people's feet over a long period of time, creating a line through the wilderness. And now it's become very much a part of the compositions that I'm trying to create in the photography here.
In a place of such immensity, I was drawn to something very small, a rock wren collecting insects for its young. They're one of the smallest birds in New Zealand and one of the more mysterious. It's not known how they survive winters here when thick snow may cover the pass for months. At the pass lunch shelter, the Keas were waiting. They must view human activity up here with some confusion. Every day, close to midday, the people arrive. Some go in one door of the shelter, others go in another. The separation of guided walkers and us independent types is preserved even on top of mountain paths.
It's a bit splendid, isn't it? What's it like next door?
3 earlier shelter buildings have blown off this pass. I think it should qualify as neutral territory.
And then I looked at rock greens.
You passed rock greens? Yeah.
One just up off the pass beyond the monument there.
On a day like this, with the humans inside, the Keas received few handouts. They feed mainly on plant material, but are always willing to experiment with new flavours. And I'm not sure who got more fun out of the photographic session. But after lunch, like every day, the Keas watched us leave the shelter and begin our descent.
It's an incredible track over an incredible pass. It is, even in the rain, I could see that it is a most unusual place in the world, where two with enormous glaciers on both sides chewed away and chopped these tremendous cirques. It may be paralleled somewhere else, but I doubt it.
We descended from the pass in perfect weather, which brought out many alpine insects. The New Zealand mountains support an array of colourful day-flying moths. They're sun seekers beyond compare. All insects that live in the mountains must take full advantage of its warmth, because it mightn't last very long. In the late afternoon, we were engulfed by a storm of great fury. Te Tautea, or Sutherland Falls, cascades 580 metres in 3 giant leaps.
It's like being a fly directly underneath a cold water tap turned full on. It's just so much power, and I mean the sheer noise apart from anything else. I mean every one of your senses is blown wide apart.
The falls are fed by a large glacial cirque, named Lake Quill after its discoverer. Ever since young William Quill scaled up the falls to find their source, climbers have been rewarded and challenged by Fiordland's mountains.
But you don't need to climb to be strongly affected by them. Some walkers are recharged, others are humbled, but most just stand in awe.
Crossing the pass is by no means the end of the walk. On the 4th and final day, the track follows the Arthur River as it hurries to the sea. The walkers too must hurry if they are not to miss the 3 p.m. boat at track's end.
Oh yeah. This would have been one hell of a landslip here, Connor. But you can see where some of the trees are still stuck onto the cliff up there. And all Fiordland would have been like this after the last glaciation, but just smooth like this.
West of the pass is the wettest region of New Zealand. There were even more ferns, and for the first time, we saw giant tree ferns. Prince of Wales fern also appeared. Ferns brushed our faces. They constantly tapped us on the shoulders and ankles as we hurried on down valley. For most of us, the journey did not include a boat ride. Peter Lewis's boatman on Lake Ada, thought to have been formed by a slip about 600 years ago. Below water, the drowned forest still stands. Long-dead beech trees have been preserved below lake level, and they can pose real problems for inexperienced boaties. The rest of us took the track around the edge of Lake Ada. Journey's end, the sea, was less than 10 kilometres away. Below Mackay Falls, there lies a victim of its immense power. Bell Rock has been hollowed by water to the size of a huge cathedral bell. And having created it, the river has hurled it aside. Near the lake, the track is suspended over wetland, too fragile to withstand 80 pairs of feet daily.
Even where it's quite artificial, like the boardwalk, it's still fitted into the bigger context of a beautiful sort of sculptural manner. But obviously, if you stand back from it, climb away from that line and look from a long distance at it, it's not a big feature in the total framework that you're looking at.
The Milford track is a line through the wilderness that offers the remote feeling of a truly wild land to walkers without experience and who would normally feel terrified in such a place.
Giant Gate Falls was our last chance to rest. The journey was almost over.
Who knows, perhaps it won't be tomorrow that the light will dawn for Koro. Perhaps it might be when he's my age. But he'll never forget. And this is what these places do to us. They help us not to forget who we are and what we are.
It seemed as if we'd known each other for ages. Yet 3 days earlier, we'd started out as strangers.
It's something that I've picked up from my old aunt's way. You know, all over the country, with, you know, when flies, or sand flies, mosquitoes buzzed around you, you didn't attack them and start killing them off like that. All you say is just wave them away gently and say, hoki atu ki tō tūpuna.
Say this.
Go, hoki atu ki tō tūpuna.
Right.
Go back to your ancestors.
How many k's left now?
Couple, I think. How you going?
Pretty good, so far.
Are you?
Yeah.
You were setting a pretty good pace before. Couldn't keep up with you.
The last day is pretty tough. In some ways, I think it's just as tough as the day of the pass. We covered 18 kilometres on the last day and had to be at Sandfly Point on time.
I think today has been the most lovely experience in the sunshine, and we appreciated it so much more, not having had it all along.
Nobody would have convinced me I was going to wade through water 3 feet deep for fun before I set out.
And here we are.
We've made it.
I never thought we'd ever do it. Journey's End. Wonderful.
Journey's End, legend has it, is where a god placed a pair of breeding sandflies to bite those who stood too long gazing at the scenery.
Sandfly Point, or Tenamu, is well named. And I was glad that we were viewing Milford Sound from well beyond the range of Tenamu.
Actually, when we left Tenamu and I looked back, I quietly waved. I never said goodbye, though, because I know I will come back.
I think it is some of the most dramatically beautiful scenery that we could tramp through, and ordinary people straight off city streets can for 4 days travel on their own 2 feet through this wild landscape.
It was a fantastic walk. We saw Fiordland in all weathers, picked a good time of year, and it was a good bunch of people to walk with. And I think that's one of the most important things about an experience like this.